Our council should not be changing its own ethical constraints. We shouldn't be changing our own rules. After all, voters have elected us to operate under these rules. Changing the midterm within 6-week period and without a vote of the people undermines that agreement we have made with our residents.
That's Seattle City Council member Dan Strauss voicing some concerns over a measure the council is discussing this week that would make it easier for members to vote on legislation even if they have a possible financial conflict of interest. I feel so conflicted over that also this week. A change in the way you might get a ticket for speeding or running a red light in Seattle. And why is the Seattle Police Officers Guild, the union of rank-and-file cops, suing its own department? So many twists and turns this week. We're trying to straighten things out on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan, a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I am joined by my co-host David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I am celebrating, I think a few other people are too, the warmest day of the year this week in the Seattle area, mid-70s to 80s in some spots. Do you have a certain temperature where you say, all right, it is shorts time, pack those jeans away, get rid of the long pants? What do you got?
I'm always late to the switch because I always have convinced myself that it's not real. So I always end up in summer clothes way too late.
I committed to shorts like 3 weeks ago, and I've suffered a few times. But overall, I made the commitment. I'm sticking with it. And yeah, I know this is totally the fall summer we're in, but I am loving it so far. Thank you, David. And thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks always to our show patrons. Always hoping to connect with a few more of you out there if you'd like. Patrons get access to Patrons First content. We got some of that coming up later this month. As the phrase would imply, you get that before anybody else. Plus, you get a cool decal for the laptop or your coffee mug. Check that out. Join in at a starting pledge of just $5 a month. Check it out. Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. While you're there, please offer your support. Also, a big thanks to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get this thing fired up. Time for Right Here, Right Now. So in the Governance, Accountability, and Economic Development Committee this Thursday for the Seattle City Council, the agenda includes an item that has uncorked a bit of a controversy here. Councilmember Kathy Moore, at the request, she says, of City Ethics and Elections Director Wayne Barnett, is sponsoring a measure that would change the requirement that council members have to recuse themselves from voting on measures in which they may have a financial interest. Under the new law, council members would only be required to disclose the possible conflict. David, you've done some reporting about this for the Seattle Times. Is the council trying to lower its ethical standards, or how would you describe this?
Yeah, it's interesting because the head of the Ethics Commission, Wayne Barnett, is the one recommending this, which is interesting. You know, you'd consider him to be the sort of standard bearer of what ethics are. And his interpretation here is he feels like there are too many opportunities that people can sort of point to, or too many occasions when somebody could theoretically possibly recuse themselves, that he felt like the ethics code was disrupting the legislative process in a way that he felt pretty uncomfortable with, and was looking at this and thinking, hey, you know, this is a district system where, unlike where it used to be where everybody had 9 representatives in City Hall, now everyone really has 3 because you have your district and your 2 citywide.
So it's almost like you're disenfranchising people in a way.
So if the person you voted for has to recuse themselves, then your voice isn't there. And,
right.
You know, I think there's a part of it that he was saying, you know, if somebody is elected because they are a small business owner, you know, that's a talking point on the campaign trail. You know, I run a small business, I know what it takes, so on and so forth. If that same qualification then makes it so you can't vote on small business items, his argument is that's not really upholding what it is that people voted for in the first place. You know, on the flip side, you know, makes it easier for people to vote on measures that they have a financial interest in, and that. Yeah. To lots of folks, including several people on the city council, is a concern. And that comes up, you know, a few times a year. Councilmember Tanya Wu had to recuse herself because there was a vote on app-based delivery driver wages that would have directly affected her family's business in Chinatown International District. So, you know, I think there are rational arguments here on both sides of this, but it comes at a time when people are, you know, really attuned to the ethics within government because of what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah, that's what Councilmember Strauss was talking about. And I did want to put a finer point on it because it seems like the council will be discussing some legislation that deals with landlords and tenants. And I know Councilmember Rivera has a small rental property. She disclosed that. And I would imagine she wants to be part of this discussion when it comes to these new laws coming up. I feel that that's where this may come to a head. If the council is able to pass this legislation, then that other legislation dealing with the tenant laws or whatever might be cleared that more council members could be involved with it, I guess. Is that how you're looking at it?
Yeah, Councilmember Moore says they're not a nexus to that piece of legislation, but whether it's intentional or not, the conflict of interest code would certainly probably have some kind of influence on the final vote there. As it probably would have made more of a difference when Tanya Wu was on the council, because she probably she had some landlord interest too in her family. And as far as I can tell, and some other council members have owned property. As far as I can tell, the only one right now that is actually making money off of that property is Councilmember Rivera. But
okay,
we saw with the app-based delivery driver vote how impactful even one council person not being able to vote can be, and that landlord tenant legislation is not going to be a walk in the park. The people are already sort of preparing for that to come out and be a bit of a political fight. And so Councilmember Moore says this isn't a precursor specifically to that, but it will have an effect on the likelihood of that passing if this ethics change passes.
Very interested to see where this goes. Again, some great arguments on both sides. We'll see how they suss out in the council's committee this week discussing it. All right, in other committee action this week, the Transportation Committee is looking at a measure, I should say, that we've touched on before, David, this ordinance that would allow more usage of automatic traffic safety cameras. So state law changed in 2024, making permanent a pilot program from 2019 that lets cities enforce the block the box type of legislation out there, the transit lane restrictions and other lane restrictions, and they'll use automated cameras to do that. The part I find really interesting is that trained police and transportation employees, not just sworn officers, will be allowed to review these violations. Let me get to that in a second, David. But overall, do you see this ordinance helping make Seattle safer? I think that's the bottom line here. It looks like it might help Seattle target some street racing areas too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea. And I again, as we've talked about a lot on the show, the reality is the Seattle Police Department is really not doing traffic enforcement right now. I haven't checked the data lately, but it basically fell off a cliff around the time of the pandemic. And so I think the idea is any sort of added measure here is a positive for traffic safety. It has the kind of effect of being enforcement without actually putting people in direct confrontation with police. It's probably in the long run cheaper. You don't actually need people to do it. And then, I think in theory too, it sort of trains people for those areas. They'll know that there's cameras there and then they will not speed there. That also probably is a downside of it, which is people will learn where these cameras are and not speed in that area. I don't know how much, when you think that there is a traffic cop around every corner, you might behave differently rather than saying, oh, I know that on this street, there's a traffic camera. The other side of this is that for a while, at least, until maybe people's behavior changes, it will bring in money for the city of Seattle, and advocates for traffic safety are pushing that is immediately then reinvested into safety measures. I don't know exactly where that stands in city council. It's going to be tempting for people to use that money to plug the budget gap, but the push right now is to use that money to spend on traffic safety improvements. And so that would be another measure that would theoretically actually make the road safer.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, David, but within the city council memo with this legislation, one of your 2023 articles was quoted here, talking about the 100,000 infractions that weren't even reviewed in between 2021 and 2023, a $4.3 million loss of revenue. So if this legislation passes, it's the Croman factor, I'm sure, that's pushing it through. I did want to get onto this idea, though. Civilians making the call on these tickets, not sworn officers, etc. Is that like a big win for the city? Is it going to create some friction with the police union? Any idea where that issue is going?
Yeah, the police union question is interesting. I think that most people would basically support that because it's not like you need a gun or protection to sit in an office and review tickets. And it has caused problems, as we just talked about, that officers have been the ones that have to do that in the past. We've seen it in Seattle, but I think that's part of the hang up too. I don't know where that stands now. It was part of the hang up with automated enforcement of people who would run past school buses.
Right.
Those were tickets that used to be reviewed by the King County Sheriff's Office. They didn't want to devote the resources to it anymore, so then it got kicked to Seattle, and it took a long time. I don't actually know how that ended up resolving. I left my traffic beat before I got to see the end of that story. But that's all to say that I do think will objectively make it easier to review these automated tickets, but that the police departments like to use those positions for people who might need to be off the street for some reason or another.
Sure,
people who have investigations into them. So it's not exactly like work that they love necessarily, but it does serve a purpose for the police unions in that members who might be in some kind of trouble or under investigation, it's a desk job that they can put people at for a while.
Interesting. Man, that's going to be an interesting twist there. Thank you, David, for your fount of knowledge on all these different issues. I did want to talk about with you up next the curious case of union support for political candidates in the city of Seattle and how Bruce Harrell, once a target of opposition for organized labor, now might have union workers on his side. David took a close look at this. We're going to peel apart this story coming up next on Now Hear This. Well, folks, you have seen it in just about every political campaign in the city of Seattle. Who has the support of business voices? Who has the support of organized labor? It's rare that candidates in a contested election get a majority of both of those constituencies on their side, but it appears Bruce Harrell may be on that path. So the mayor is busy this week touting legislation to encourage more building in downtown and South Lake Union, filling up empty buildings with new businesses. But he also brokered a deal in 2023 with labor, with the city's largest collection of unions, in fact, and he spoke about it at a signing ceremony to celebrate that contract in the early part of 2024. Here's a brief clip.
My politics are very simple. I believe in my employees. They are our greatest assets. And if we can't, these labor contracts affect more than 7,000 city workers. If we can't invest in our assets, I said, then I better get another job. I'll take the hits because I believe in you.
David, I'm really glad you did this piece because it's important to see where the money is going in elections. You wrote that Harrell won the office of mayor in 2021, even though organized labor spent $500,000 trying to beat him. Now it seems like some of the union groups that were against him then are supporting him now. What's going on?
Yeah, I've found this pretty interesting. I think there is a lot going on here. Start up top with Harrell, I think, is broadly viewed as likely to win. And if that's the case, I do think that influences endorsement decisions, because then you're not necessarily trying to help somebody win. You are siding with the person that you think is most likely to, influence your members' work and what they get in the future. So that is a big piece of it. Unions really liked the various levies that the city has passed, the transportation levy and housing levy in particular. So that's big. But, I zeroed in on these negotiations with the city's largest union because that stood out to me as a sort of intentional effort on Harrell's part, I would say, to help kind of bring labor more to his side, because those negotiations were going on for a really long time, like a year, between the city's kind of nonpartisan staff negotiators and the unions, and they were at this stalemate. And Harrell, came in and at the last minute and got way more involved in these negotiations than a mayor would usually on something like this. Usually this is a staff thing, and the mayor himself, by the way, with his political consultant who was working in his office at the time by his side, got really involved in these negotiations and ended up making an offer that was and this number hadn't been reported before, but was like $180 million over what the city's internal limit had been. And, I think that went a really long way in making labor like Harrell. It also sort of raised some eyebrows because it did benefit Harrell politically, and he was involved so closely in a way that I think stood out to some people. And, this deal was pretty expensive. It was a really good deal for labor, and it came right before the city had to deal with this big kind of budget gap. And so it just struck me as, I can't read his mind. I don't know precisely what he was thinking or anything like that, but the kind of the cause and effect there of his kind of intimate involvement with this labor negotiation, followed by a kind of upswell of support by labor that I think will benefit his reelection. I just found it sort of interesting, an interesting sequence of events and an interesting story that hadn't been told.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I did want to keep going down that path of what this deal struck a couple of years ago means for 2025, because here we are with a budget gap that's somewhere around $240 million. The fiscal outlook isn't looking great, I would have to say, for the city right now. Even the city's own financial advisors are saying things of that nature, the people who do the forecast for the city right now. What is that deal that the mayor struck in 2023 going to cost the city in 2025? Because these are real dollars we're talking about. Does he have to make some concessions there? Will other programs have to suffer? Where do you see that part of it going?
Yeah, well, the number that the city's internal negotiators were really stuck on, and that they basically were not allowed to go any higher on, was something like 1.5% raises for city workers. So it was a low number, but the number that Harrell ended up giving them was closer to 5% raises, which, in the grand scheme of labor agreements is not some obscene number, but it is locked in, whereas other sort of revenue or spending can be tweaked or moved around.
Yeah.
Once the contract's signed, the contract is signed. So by agreeing to that, by agreeing to that deal with the labor negotiators, he has kind of cast in concrete one part of the city's budget, which will then continue to go up. And I'm not here to pass judgment on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there's plenty of arguments to be made that, if you're going to be spending money, it should be on your workers because you want a good product and you want people to come work for the city and so on and so forth. Yeah. It is just the reality, though, that unlike, say, the jumpstart tax, where you have some flexibility, you can move it around a little bit to plug some holes. Once you've committed to a collective bargaining agreement, that those costs are now baked in.
Yeah. Very good observations there, and great piece here, folks. Make sure you check this out in the Times. David doing some good reporting on that. I wanted to talk about another piece you wrote, David, that I thought was an interesting twist as well. This about City Attorney Ann Davison wants to provide a new way through the city legal system for people arrested under Seattle's drug laws. So she discontinued the community court system very outwardly, infamously, perhaps, which was also a diversion model, this community court system. She discontinued that 2 years ago. What's different about this new plan she's got on the table?
Yeah, I would say, well, I will say first that the people who supported that community court that got killed will say there's not that much different, and this is a political stunt. Okay. So there's that argument. I would say that there are some key pieces that are different. The big one being, it is up to the city attorney's office to decide who is eligible for this. Before, it was an automatic enrollment program, and I think that gives them a level of control over who they deem basically worthy or likely to go through some kind of community court process. And then the other piece is that it adds this, stay out of drug area order component to it, which we know that the city attorney's office has really been trying to use more. They've been frustrated that it hasn't been used more. And so I think it is notable that they are sort of tying in, if you come to this community court, you have to agree to stay out of this area. That I think will kind of juice the numbers on how often those areas are used. And so that feels to me significant. But, and then the other piece that's quite a bit different is that there is a urine analysis involved in this. And that, that's tough because, as we know, fentanyl is not something that most people fully kick in 15 days, which is really the first check-in and requires a lot of pretty intense support. But if you fail the urine analysis, then you don't get to graduate from the program. And so that I think makes it all a little more of a stick approach than the carrot one of before, I would say. At the end of the day, though, it is similar in that it is an alternative path. If you kind of hit these benchmarks, you get your charges dropped. And so in that respect, it's still kind of similar.
Two-part question next on this one. What's it going to cost? And is it going to be money well spent? Is it going to work? I know you talked with some people who are fans of the community court beforehand. What are they saying about this new program that Davison's talking about?
Yeah, so the cost, there wasn't a price tag on it. The big thing is that they will be asking the city for more staff to help out in the court's community resource center, which is what, sets people up with connections or phone numbers that they might need. As far as is it going to work, I think I don't know that you would find anyone who would be comfortable expressing a lot of confidence that it will. That's not to say that it won't ever, but the folks that are coming,
because the work to get people out of drug habits or whatever else, it's not just a 30-day process, I suppose.
Right. And more than that, there are other opportunities. There likely have been other opportunities for the folks who come through this court to make those connections, namely through organizations like LEAD. And so if they are at that point where they're going through community court, that probably means they have not taken up voluntary offers of this kind of service, which means that at this point they are trying to sort of mandate people into taking some of these services. And when, the combination of homelessness and fentanyl addiction are really powerful forces. And it's not like this new community court comes with wraparound housing and check-ins and case managers and access to treatment. The services that are being offered here are fairly light. And so, I think you're asking a lot of people without a lot of commensurate kind of necessary resoses.
Yeah,
it's not to say it's not, I'm not trying to dismiss it as totally unworthwhile or anything like that, but it is a tall task. And I think the people in the city attorney's office would certainly acknowledge that. In fact, in her statement, City Attorney Ann Davison said, I know that this is just a building block, and in the long term, we need a lot more money for treatment.
Good point. And also good point that she is running for office. Got her name out there one more time. We'll see what happens with that this fall. But very interesting twist there from the city attorney's office. And we'll see what happens next there as this legislation tries to work its way through the city. All right, well, coming up next, what happens when a group of cops can't get the public records they need from their own police department? That's the subject of a new lawsuit from the Seattle Police Officers Guild. The details coming up on What's Next. David, I wanted to bring up this last story, which I saw in Publicola from the always hardworking Erica C. Barnett, because it reflects a problem that I have dealt with, and I know you have too as a reporter. Public records requests, especially to the Seattle Police Department, are notoriously slow for the city of Seattle, have been for many years. The Seattle Times, as you know, filed a lawsuit against the SPD about this, and now even the Seattle Police Officers Guild, again, that rank and file union for the Seattle PD, they have filed a suit this week. In one case, they're looking for some records from back in March of 2020. David, I just wanted to ask you, what does it say to you that SPOG is filing a suit on this against their own police department?
Well, it confirms that it's not going very well in the public records unit. I think the issue here at hand is this grouping practice.
Can you break that down on what that is, what that means?
Yeah, basically, it's that if somebody files multiple public records requests and they're, an individual or someone with an organization, that the Seattle Police Department sometimes would take those requests and put them all in the same spot in the queue. And that means that, say, you have separate requests and you kind of like them to be processed in a certain order. That's not going to happen because they've all put them all together at once. So that results in, you might file 5 requests and you're not going to get even the first one for years. In theory, they're not supposed to be doing this anymore, but there's some evidence that they are still. And that's what SPOG is suing over. I think it's interesting that SPOG is trying to extract records from its own department. I don't know exactly what they're trying to do with those records or show. I think it probably suggests the chilly relationship between some people in the kind of, administrative side of the department and the officers in that department. But, I do think, you have strange bedfellows sometimes that, the SPOG is not, I think it's not putting it lightly to say that SPOG is not a fan of the Seattle Times. They say it fairly regularly. And yet here we kind of, the paper and the union kind of have a shared interest, and that's interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're on the same side as Publicola either, but there you go.
No.
I know Erica has something like 9 requests up there as well. That whole idea of grouped request, it doesn't seem like it's providing any answers here, or the SPD isn't following that rule, or what's going on here? What are the mechanics behind the scenes? Can you tell what's happening there?
No, I can't. I mean, there's some question about like when it's technically grouping versus when it's not. How many requests you have to hit before they're grouped. There's like some nuance here. I think basically, and and there was a settlement agreement saying that the SPD shouldn't be doing that anymore.
Right.
You know, I don't know the issue well enough to know if to the extent to which they're doing that. So, but you know, the fact that SPOG is bringing this will keep the pressure on them, I suppose.
Yeah, here's hoping. I think it's been a frustration for a lot of different reporters around the city, and I'm hoping that they can figure out some answers there. I'm interested too to see what SPOG actually does with records of that nature. Always interesting to see. But it is time to wrap up here, David. I saw this piece in Axios this week that the state of Washington, of course, a great place to live, has fallen to 10th on the list of best states in the U.S. That is down from 8th last year. We were up back in number 1 at the first spot back in 2019 and 2021. Washington received high marks for natural environment, but we got dinged on public safety, short-term fiscal stability. They're probably listening to our budget deficit reports there. And then cost of living is a mark against Washington too. So, David, the question is it time to flee the state, move next door to Idaho, which somehow, some way was ranked above us? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds like that costs a lot of money to do.
Right.
I've never lived. I've lived in Portland for a while and some other places for months at a time, but really I've lived in Washington for most of my life. So I can't imagine moving to Idaho.
Yeah, well, here are your other choices: Utah, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Nebraska, Florida. Come on, Florida. Vermont, South Dakota, and Massachusetts. Anyone else there on the list feeling like a good spot where you want to head to?
Oh man, I like the Black Hills in South Dakota, but the rest of the state, I take issue with that being a place that anyone would want to live.
See, that's what I'm saying. I don't know.
Respect to all the farmers in South Dakota, but
yep, and Nebraska and
tough state.
Yeah, and all these other places too. Well, they may be listening out there, David, so we will offer, of course, our respect to them. And Washington, we'll see if we can clean up our act there. I don't know if that's going to happen in between the time of now and our next podcast, but you never know. Thank you, David, for breaking all these important issues down with me. Thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. Really do appreciate your support. If you are not a patron, wouldn't it be great if you became one? Pledges start at just $5 a month on Patreon. That works out to about $1.25 a show if I'm doing my math right there. That would be greatly appreciated. Please think about it. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. We are there. Thank you also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.